Hello everybody, and thank you for attending this presentation of the concept of the forthcoming Biennale de Lyon by its curator, Hanru. I just give you a first introduction of Hanru. He's one of the most prolific critics and curators of his generation. He's born in China, 1963, and had his academic training there at the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing. Currently, he's based in Paris and San Francisco, where he's Director of Exhibitions and Public Programming and Chair of Exhibitions and Museum Studies at the San Francisco Art Institute. He has worked as a consultant for institutions like the Solomon Guggenheim Museum in New York, the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, the Contemporary Art Museum in Kumamoto, Japan, and many others. And he lectured at numerous institutions, including the Rijksacademie in Amsterdam. He's contributor to various art journals, among them the Flash Art International. And among the many exhibitions he curated are the 10th Istanbul Biennale under the title Optimism in the Age of Global Wars, 2007, the Chinese Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in the same year, 2007, under the title Everyday Miracle, and the Guangzhou Biennale in 2002, just to name a few. Hanru, for the Lyon Biennale, you chose the title Spectacle of the Everyday. Usually we would expect that spectacle is something that's in opposition of our everyday life. Can you explain what you want to express by this paradox?
At first, thanks very much, Gerhard, and also the Arts Lobby to give me a chance to talk about this biennial. Well, actually, to answer the question, let's start with the logo you just saw. It was the 10th at the same time as X. So I tried to make something as, monumental as the 10th is, because 10th is always meaning something sublime and monumental. Mm-hmm. Almost like the end of the world, right? Usually the 10th, that's the end. Uh-huh. And then it looks also like an X, so as sexy as possible. So I guess the spectacle is the monumental, and the spectacle also is the end of the world. Mm-hmm. As Guy Debord would said that the spectacle, the society of the spectacle, actually is really the most amazing thing that human being has created to commit suicide, basically. Mm-hmm. Because we are pushed to this ultimate logic of consumption. Then every real creation is being frozen into objects and commodity and put into under spotlight as the brand mm-hmm. of mm-hmm. our nature mm-hmm. and our existence. On the other hand, you have the real life, which is constantly being excluded mm-hmm. from the spectacle, from the established mm-hmm. system. So the sexy side of our life is constantly being kind of censored and excluded. So I want to bring this back, but it's not only about sexuality, it's about real life, the everyday, how people invent little strategies and little tricks to make our life better and with more pleasure and go beyond the control of this logic of consumption and the logic of the spectacle. Mm-hmm. So these two opposition words, of course, has been kind of, as you said, opposite to each other. Uh-huh. And what I want to really to think is really a biennial opens up possibilities for us to create a platform these two opposing forces can meet and crash mm-hmm. and generate certain kind of energy. That might be a kind of new departure point for our effort to come up with creative ideas and actions. That is,
may I interrupt?
Yeah.
When you say that the idea of the spectral has been like a totalitarianism phenomenon, it's covering all of our life, where do you see possibilities to intervene into that, to create spaces that are not tangled by this spectacle?
Yes, I think it's really coming. Let's start with looking at what a biennial is. Usually, a biennial is really the spectacle. It's the spectacle of the how the art world actually try to show its ultimate possibility to achieve the status of being the most glorious objects, right? And on the other hand, when you also look at another side of what a biennial can possibly offer to us, is also another platform. That platform is related to the necessity of presenting certain ideas and projects in a specific context that is related to the necessity of transforming the local conditions.
But isn't that very difficult? I mean, biennials during the last 15 years have become the super spectacles themselves. It's all very grand, very expensive. Everybody travels there. There's a lot of effort made to go to this biennial. It's almost like Oscar night or something similar.
I think on the surface you might say that, but on the other hand, in fact, when you really look at the history of biennials, most of the biennials, or the cultural biennials, have been actually created outside of this condition. It's exactly the opposite. When you really think about what has been the most significant biennials for the last 20 years, it's been usually biennials happening outside of the so-called traditional centers. That's actually there's a part of this globalization process, let's call it, that biennials actually became a kind of experimental laboratories for places where didn't have established infrastructures to try to develop certain conditions for the artists or for the public to get access to contemporary expressions.
And how would you see that possible in Lyon? I mean, you're doing the 10th edition of it, so there is quite a 20-year history of doing biennales, and it's very well established and well received. So it's not an off-site place anymore.
Yeah, actually, the situation of biennials, the Lyon Biennial, and also biennials inside Europe, it's pretty different from biennials from like in Istanbul, in Havana, or in Tirana, for example. Fundamentally, there are two types of projects. There are two types of institutions. While in Tirana or in somewhere in Dakar, a biennial is a place where the local scene is being founded through the introduction of this kind of projects. While in Lyon, it's more about developing a new possibility for already established structure. And the history of the Lyon Biennial has been closely related to two things. One is the institution itself, the Museum of Contemporary Art that Thierry Hasbay founded, and he's also the founder of the Biennial. And that was intending to create a platform that, outside of the museum, but as an extension of the established, it's like an extension of the system of recognition of artists. And on the other hand, also, it's related to the idea of having a curatorial project. So it was called the Biennial of the Author. While the French is very obsessed with the idea of the death of the author, but still. So it's related to these two things. But also, over 20 years, there's a very important change in terms of the history of the biennial. In the beginning, there were biennial, but there were now the culture of biennial. And today, we are living in the time of a culture of biennial. That is actually kind of reversed impact from outside of the West, that the biennials actually already generated a very different form of representation and presentation, and especially a very different form of cultural production that is actually bringing its own impact, its own influence back to the so-called center. So when you look at how the Lyon Biennial evolves, it's really interesting to see, indeed, it evolves from a very Eurocentric kind of structure gradually into much more global, and also in its format. So it's increasingly engaging itself into the urban conditions as well.
So what would you see is the special contribution the Lyon Biennial can do to all that framework of biennials we have?
Well, it's a very ambitious question. Or it's, well, I guess it's a very interesting that the 10th biennial happens at the time that people start talking about crisis. And actually one has to really question what crisis means. We have a black cross at the entrance of the fair, which is a very significant gesture. And also when you look at this year's Venice Biennial, I exaggerated, maybe half of the pavilions were covered with black colors. So it's a very interesting kind of strange moment. I guess even our logo looks black and white. But on the other hand, I really think it's, again, coming back to this question of the spectacle. Maybe it's the end of a certain system of the spectacle. It's time to really shift the spotlight to somewhere else, which is being historically excluded from the spectacle, which is I said the quotidien, the everyday. And in this kind of situation, you can actually really think about maybe that this crash or this conflict between these two opposing forces can really generate a new possibility for us, maybe too ambitious to say that, to redefine what contemporary art creation means. What is the possibility to connect the art world back to the real life, the social life, and even politics. So in that case, I really think I would not assume that this is going to be change the history of biennials, but I think that can allow us to kind of make the first step to test out certain possibilities.
Isn't there a conflict within the exhibition itself? If I understand you correctly, you have one section that is more or less dealing with objects, as we know the tradition of exhibitions, and then you have other sections that are here for discussions, or you have a section that does work with inhabitants in certain parts of the city of Lyon. And how do you help the visitors that they don't enter the old trap to see these presented objects in the old tradition they are used to? Well, I mean, just coming here from the art fair, you mentioned the word crisis. One dealer told me, I haven't heard the word crisis for all 3 days. Business is splendid. I haven't sold so many artworks as I did this year for the last 10 years.
I don't think really the question of crisis is specific about an art fair or art market even. I think it's really a crisis of the general social, economic, and political system. What is in crisis now, I think it's much more profound than simply a question of the art market. I think we really need to position our commitment, our engagement in such a perspective. So it doesn't really matter if a dealer say I make even more money, good for him, but that's not the answer. I think the answer is really to look back to the relationship between what we call art creation and how the society has actually changed. And
how are you bringing this into the exhibition?
Yeah, that's right. This is the thing I want to bring in. Basically, I try to structure the exhibition into 4 parts. If you have a chance to look at this, there are about there are 4 and plus 1 sections. This section consisting of the first part is called the magic of things, or the reinvention of the everyday. So that is the
what are you doing
yeah,
there? Yeah.
This is the thing you talk about, the objects. Of course, we start with, a pretty conventional kind of starting point, which is how artists actually manage to transform everyday objects into something extraordinary. And that extraordinary does not only mean a kind of aesthetic product or effect. It could be transformed into a really a very a clear political statement, for example, or historical kind of discourses, or proposals for transforming our surrounding environment. And the second part is called the.
Sorry, do you give me as a visitor help to reframe that for myself?
Well, let me just give you one example. Some artists like Jimmy Durham, for example, he's been able to really manage to transform the most banal, most boring objects into something really magic, and this magic, it's not simply related to the tradition of arte povera, for example. I think it tells the whole history of his people or different peoples in the world, different kind of communities over the period of the expansion of modernity, that how they actually have been excluded, marginalized, and what kind of new proposal that they can come up with to transform this situation, and that is clearly a very political engagement. And then maybe let me go to the second part. It's called actually it's very difficult to translate it in English. The original title is called Éloge de la dérive. I think most of you know what the dérive means. The dérive actually, it's a strategy in the art context. It's the strategy developed by the situationists to basically to encourage people to hang around on the street and get lost, and then do something which is totally irrelevant according to the normal rules. And that is by pushing this boundary of being irrelevant that they are managed to transform or to make a proposal as a kind of alternative project to transform the established urban order that is imposed by, for example, the culture of the spectacle. Behind that, of course, there's the culture of the bourgeoisie, or in the more recent terms, capitalism. Right?
So it's a strategy of withdrawal from it.
Yeah. And not only withdrawal, and also evasion. It's like bringing all kind of so-called irrelevant actions to deconstruct the urban space.
It's a way of saying no. We won't be part of that. Is there a proposal that goes further, that makes an alternative proposition?
Well, totally. And also, what is more essential here is actually when you really look at the current situation of the global art, you might understand that actually most of the non-Western, or even the gray part of the so-called Western contemporary art, the most interesting part usually come not from institutional spaces, not from the clearly defined kind of infrastructure. They come from how artists directly engage themselves into real life space, especially in the street spaces, at the street level. And that actually, for me, created maybe the most interesting energy and form of action. And that is totally beyond the possibility of how museum can represent them.
Can you give us an example?
Well, one example is, I always come back to this, excuse me for my Chineseness. It's the Chinese artist, Lin Yilin.
Yes.
It's not very often that I try to defend Chinese artists, but it happens. So, Lin actually in 1994 did an incredibly interesting action in the street of Guangzhou. And what they did actually is in front of a construction. Everyone knows that in the 90s, China was going through a huge urban expansion. So you have constructions all around, and expansions of streets, and new areas are being built, and all those things. So in front of one of the tallest buildings being under construction, and he decided to do something totally stupid. He built a wall with bricks on one side of the street, and then start moving the brick across the street, one brick by one brick. So it took him like hours to bring the whole wall across that. And people look at him thinking him as a stupid worker who have no idea what modern technology can offer to transport the bricks. So basically, during these hours, he created a terrible traffic jam. And this is actually a beautiful metaphor of what contemporary art can do, not only on the street and also on the society, in the politics, as a way to negotiate for, you might call it an alternative space.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that, of course, Lin is in the show. This is why I mentioned his name. He is going to show also another very interesting piece you're going to discover maybe. Yeah.
Do you have any project especially for Lyon?
Oh yeah.
In this section?
Yes. Maybe can I just finish this two
Okay.
parts, and then the third part and the fourth part, one is called Another World is Possible. It's very banal issue today that everyone is dreaming of the utopia against the global capital world, right? But on the other hand, that even this the cliche, I think is really a very, very important issue that we need to bring it in our discussion of what artists are doing, how they actually engaged with such a seemingly impossible task.
Isn't it just like a mother patting the kid's hand and saying, "You can do it.
No.
Everything's coming fine"?
Not at all. I think the fact that I came up with this title is really because of the research, because of a long-term collaboration and research, working with the artists actually, that makes me understand that there are so many artists in the world. They have been doing this for a long time. They achieve incredible things that are not very often presented in biennials or exhibitions. So that I felt there's an emergency to bring them in. And then the last part is called Living Together. To answer your question of relating to Lyon, we try to relate the biennial in two ways to the city. One is, of course, the museum itself. The museum played a very important role in the the transformation of the cultural life in the city. But in the meantime, it also has a beautiful collection. And I want to actually bring up a part of the collection, kind of revitalize it. As a part of the biennial, to say two things. One is, the memory of the evolution of this history is very important. On the other hand, also, a museum is not only a site of memory, it's also a site of openness by using its memory to embrace a kind of public interaction. So I selected a few works from the collection which are basically, projects transforming the museum space into open platforms for public participation. Typically, like the work of Sakis, and that we're going to reinstall this work and put new energy, new elements into it, and especially introduce a new program of all kind of activities in it. So a work in a collection is not that object, but it's a constantly kind of the constant possibility for us to go to the next step. And another way to connect the biennial to the city, we have the plus section is Coby Judah, which is an existing program of the Biennial and the museum that they continuously bring during the biennials to bring the collection of the museum to different parts of the city, especially to suburban areas, which are kind of somehow isolated from this mainstream cultural activities. So this time we try to push the boundary even further. So we bring a few artists to come to do residence in the suburban areas in Lyon. And then they will collaborate with the local communities and create new works. And this work will be shown on the spot and also bring another part to the biennial venues. So that created a direct kind of interaction and connection.
Thank you for this profound insight. You agreed to answer questions of the public. Does anyone want to ask a question? No one?
Good.
Everything clear? We are all coming to see your biennial. Thanks very much for coming here.
He has a question.
Thank you. And it's very kind of stupid question. I quite like the graphic design of the Biennale. So I'm wondering who designed this. And I mean, somehow it also integrates this kind of concept behind this visual image, but still probably it's interesting to learn that what kind of concept from this visual somehow spread kind of presentation of the Biennale.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. Actually, I started talking about the logo itself. It's a group of designers based in Brussels called Donuts. They proposed this logo. Actually, it's a long story to tell, but it's a very interesting thing because basically I was invited to do the biennial 3 months ago. So when I went to Lyon for the first time, and they already, have proposed these logos, which is a great coincidence that that allows me to actually to come up with such interpretation of the tent, which is. I think that the concept is really very interesting. It's a very uniform kind of logo, but on the other hand, it includes a multitude of possibilities. I think it's really extremely smart idea, and also visually it's black and white. It's really very straightforward, and I believe if we manage to get them on the street, that would be very visible, and that helps a lot. Of course, the project itself didn't really start with the logo itself. The project was basically Thierry called me like in the end of sometime in January or something, and then he gave me a few days to think about what to do. So basically after 2 days I sent him the project with the title and all those things. So and then I think really it's all about destiny. Sometimes when you find yourself in a kind of urgency, maybe all these impossibilities come together and they become much more possible than any normal situation can offer you.
Thank you. A question up there.
Speaking about the power of the art, you have pronounced the word negotiate. Is the artist able to negotiate with the society?
Well,
can do it?
I think so, yeah. Otherwise, I would not do this job, basically. I think the reason why I have been able to do this job is truly, I really believe that this is possible. And of course, negotiations to see the effect of negotiation, it takes time. But in the specific context of the biennial, it takes 20 years before we really now start talking about the cultural biennial that becomes totally a new social category, I would say. If really you look at the general picture of cultural politics, and the biennials have been transformed from a kind of colonial expo model to size of productions all around the world, and that brings a totally new understanding of what art is, how art is related to the society. So that, for me, really, it's a very successful negotiation.
And you're an optimistic man.
I prefer not to cry every morning when I get up.
Another question?
Yes. Why don't you defend any of the Chinese artists, or prefer not to defend the Chinese artists?
Well, I defend artists, and I would not say even defend is really terrible words. I work with artists, and I work with artists to make, to increase the pleasure of our life, right? And because of my, kind of personal background, almost automatically, I'm kind of related to, or I'm supposed to be related to Chinese art. But what kind of Chinese art is actually a question. And also what I really think is essential to put artists from China or from Europe, from France, or from anywhere into a real global context. As individuals having a specific background and what they can say to the world. And so this is why, if they're Chinese or not, it's not really the most important, but definitely their Chinese experiences has contributed to the world. And I don't deny that, being an artist from China, from Africa or somewhere, that they have the special things to say. And also, they are not only saying things to be recognized, and also they're contributing to the transformation of what we understand as the modern, or as the as modernity, or as the contemporary. So when we talk about modernity, is no longer something that belonging to the West. And I think from the very beginning, it's a global kind of collaborate project with its success and with its terror.
I mean, I think that's going to be one of the most interesting points in the Lyon Biennale, that you choose artists that are really from all over. It's a global patchwork you're presenting.
Well, I would say, I really didn't start with, kind of geographic division or whatever. What I started with was really research on how people actually live in kind of in-between space. So when you really look at the biography of the artist, you often find that artists born in Paris, living in New York, work in Tokyo, or vice versa. So I think this is the condition of how every artist today actually are living in. And the geographic division is no longer a kind of horizontal division, I guess. It's really about a kind of complexity that brings different dimensions together. So when you really think about the global map, it's no longer divided this way, vertically, but it's somehow like a grid. So in every place you have a possibility to see people from majority, minority, their social status or their cultural status are even no longer defined by their color, skin color, or by their race, or by their language. I think it's much more complicated than that. So what is interesting for me is this kind of in between existing possibilities.
Thank you. I think we are running out of time.
Excuse
One more
me.
question.
One question. I come from Indonesia, and I would like to have your opinion about the biennials in Southeast Asia in terms of its standards compared to the West, because its history is still short.
Well, of course, in Southeast Asia, there are already many biennials indeed. And some are more known, some are less known. Like in Indonesia, actually the Bandung Biennial existed for more than, I think, 20 years almost. And then lately you have Jakarta Biennial and the Jogja Biennial. The Jakarta Biennial of Sculpture actually has an even longer history. That actually has more than 30 years history, I guess. It's even longer. And so this, the small biennials, so-called small biennials that people don't know or outside of the context might not know, they have actually already generated incredibly interesting scenes. So this is why we have two artists from Indonesia this year for Lyon, among about 60 people. That is pretty interesting. And Indonesia has a very engaging, very beautiful history of contemporary art for really long time. And maybe it is one of the most important powerhouses in the region. And I really think their work is incredibly challenging because the definition of contemporary art is so much related to the engagement of the artist vis-a-vis the social transformation on the one hand. On the other hand, the traditional forms of art, such as wayang and etc. etc. So actually in Southeast Asia, there are so many of these biennials that offers us from 20 years later, we can see these artists are actually bringing really important different forms of expressions to the global scene. And so I'm not able to answer the question in the general way, but I really would propose people, to look into those situations, and that we would really discover something immensely interesting.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming.